So section 2.4 for Algebra 2, we are continuing our discussion about linear equations. Yesterday we focused on slope-intercept. All right, today we're going to focus on something called point-slope form. So our goal is that we can write an equation for a line if you're given the slope and a point that it has to go through. All right. So in point-slope form, we have this equation. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x sub 1. The m is still our slope, just like it was yesterday. What's different about this is we're not given the y-intercept. We're given a different point on our graph. Okay? So that point has coordinates x1, y1. So this little y sub 1 and x sub 1 come from that specific point that they give us. Okay? So the m, the x sub 1, and the y sub 1 will be replaced with numbers. Okay? All right, so we're going to write an equation for a line that passes through the point -1, 3, and has a slope of -2/3. I want you to start memorizing these formulas. The more you write it, the easier it is to learn it. So we're going to start out by just writing the equation down. Y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1. All right, substituting in what we know. We are told that the slope is -2/3. That goes in where the m was in our equation. Okay? Then the point that it has to go through is -1, 3. So its x coordinate is -1. So we're going to have x minus a -1. The y coordinate is a 3. So y minus 3. Okay? That is in point-slope form. As we get to the point of our test for this chapter, where we know all the different versions, it's going to be really critical for you to know, am I supposed to leave it like this, or am I supposed to convert it into something else? So if it specifically said, write it in point-slope form, we'd basically be done. I probably would rewrite this as x plus 1 instead of x minus a -1, but I'd leave it in that format. Okay? We are going to simplify this. We're going to put this all the way down until it's in slope-intercept form, like we had yesterday. And later on, we'll talk about why we're doing that. So to simplify this, I need to distribute the -2/3. So I get -2/3 x. -2/3 times 1 is -2/3. We then need to add the 3 to the other side. So if I add 3 here and I add 3 here, the problem is I'm trying to add a whole number with a fraction. What do we need to do? How do I add a -2/3 with a 3? To add fractions, we need common denominators, right? Can I think of that 3 in terms of thirds? So that it has a denominator of 3? 3 is the same as 9/3. So what's -2/3 plus 9/3? Okay. So I have gone from point-slope form to slope-intercept form. Okay? You won't always have to do that. Sometimes they're just going to say write it in point-slope form. All right, for our next one, this time it says we're passing through the point 7, -1, and have a slope of -3. I'm going to pause the recording. I want you guys just to put the numbers in the right place in the formula. All right, let's check your work. So the point that it goes through is 7, negative 1. This is your x sub 1, y sub 1. And your slope is negative 3. So you should have y minus a negative 1 equals negative 3 times x minus 7. Yes? That is point slope form. Again, subtracting a negative, we could do this. Okay? Clean it up a little bit, but that still would be in point slope form. If we distribute our slope, we get negative 3x plus 21. Subtracting 1, you get y equals negative 3x plus 20. This again is slope intercept. This was point slope. Okay? Make sure you know the difference between those two. All right. How are these questions different? It's still asking for an equation in point slope form. This time there's 2 points. Before I gave you a slope and a point. If I give you 2 points, can you find slope? Okay. So the question at the bottom here is, why are these different? We need to find the slope first. Okay, so given 2 points, you're going to find the slope. So let's do that on this first one. When we find slope, what's our formula for slope? Okay, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So which ones are the y's in this example? The 9 and 1. If we subtract it this way, 9 minus 1, then what order do we have to put our x's in? The same order. So 7 minus 5. We get a slope of 4. Okay, now, which point do we use? When we want to write this in point slope form, we now have a slope, but we have 2 points. Which one do we use? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can pick either one. For this first example, I'm going to show you both of them. In the future, you just have to pick one. Okay? So, if I use the first point, I'd have y minus 1 equals my slope times x minus 5. Agree? If I use the other one, I have y minus 9 equals my slope of 4 times x minus 7. They don't look anything alike, do they? But they should be the same equation because they're the same line. This is why we've been simplifying them to slope-intercept form. In point-slope form, they don't match. But if I were to simplify these, I get y equals 4x minus 19. If I simplify this one, I still get y equals 4x minus 19. So the nice part about having you simplify it all the way down is that we can make sure our answers are the same. Okay? But again, if it says to put it in point slope form and they don't tell you which point to use, either of these answers would be okay. All right? Okay, I'm going to pause the video. I want you guys to do the next one. All right, our slope would be 7 minus 0 divided by 0 minus negative 5. So 7/5. All right. Which point did you use? First one? If we use the first one, we'd have y minus 0 equals 7/5 times x minus negative 5. Now, we should clean this up because we're never going to leave it y minus 0, right? We're just going to write that as a y. And this we would write as x plus 5. Okay, so that's one possible answer. The other possible answer would be y minus 7 equals 7/5 times x minus 0, which again, we would clean that up. Y minus 7 equals 7/5 times x. Okay? All right, so I left those in point slope form. All right. The last piece that we need to talk about are the ideas of parallel and perpendicular lines. What do you know about the first picture? They are parallel. All right, two lines that do not intersect are parallel. What can you tell me about the slopes of those parallel lines? They are the same. So with parallel lines, slopes are equal, but we have different y-intercepts. For perpendicular lines, they do intersect. They intersect in a special way. What's the special way? Yes, they intersect at 90-degree angles. Okay? What kind of slope would you use for the red one? Red one is positive, blue one is negative. Anytime you have perpendicular lines like that, your slopes are opposites. Okay, one's positive, one's negative. All right, so we have opposites and they are reciprocals. What do we mean by reciprocals? They flip. So if I said that I have a slope of -3/5, the perpendicular slope, and this is the symbol we use for perpendicular, that upside down T, okay? The perpendicular slope would be 5/3. So flip it over, do its reciprocal, opposite sign. Yes? Okay. So our first example says, what is the equation of each line? We want to simplify it to slope-intercept form. Doesn't mean we have to start with that, but that's the final answer, needs to be in that form. We want a line that is parallel to this and goes through the point -2, 1. So they're giving me x1, y1. Now the part of that sentence that I put in a box, parallel to y equals 5x minus 4. What is that telling me? That the slope is going to be the same. What's the slope from this one? 5, right? From this equation, we know that the slope is 5, and if it's parallel, it means I need to use that same thing. So I'm back to knowing a slope and a point that it goes through. We dump it in to our point slope formula. We're going to put 5 in for our slope. We're subtracting a -2 in our x coordinate and subtracting a 1 for our y coordinate. All right. It does say to simplify this. So let's go ahead and do some distributing. We get y minus 1 equals 5 times x plus 2. So distributing, we've got 5x plus 10. And if we add 1 to the other side, we okay with that? All right. The next one says we want a line that is perpendicular to y equals -4x plus 2/3. And it goes through the point 8, 5. So put a box around this. What is that chunk telling us? Okay, so perpendicular, we know slopes need to be reciprocals and opposite signs. What is the slope of the original line? -4. We want the perpendicular slope. So we're going to flip it over. Instead of 4 over 1, we're going to have 1 over 4. And instead of negative, we're going to have positive. Yes? All right, let's dump it in. So y minus our y coordinate, 5, equals our slope times x minus our x coordinate of 8. What do we get when we distribute? 1/4 times x minus, what's 1/4 times 8? 1/4 of 8 is 2. All right, adding the 5 to the other side, we get y equals 1/4 x plus 3. All right, we have one question left. How is the first line here different? How is that different from the ones that I gave you before? It's not in slope-intercept form. We're trying to identify the slope, and it's not in a form where we can see it. So you need to rearrange it. How would we put 4x plus 2y equals 7 into slope-intercept form? Okay, subtracting 4x gets us this. Okay, if we divide everything by 2, y equals negative 2x plus 7/2. And don't worry about that 7/2 being a fraction. We don't need it, right? We're just needing the slope. So in this case, the slope is negative 2. And if we want our line to be parallel, we use that same exact slope. So we want m to be negative 2, and we know a point. I'm going to pause the recording. I want you to finish this one and go ahead and do our last question. All right, so simplifying and finishing up this one, we have y minus negative 2 equals negative 2 times x minus 4. Okay, this becomes y plus 2. Distributing, we've got negative 2x plus 8. And then if we subtract 2 over, you should have y equals negative 2x plus 6. We okay with that? All right, our last question. It says we want to be perpendicular to this. So what's the given slope? The given slope is 2/3. The perpendicular slope would be negative 3/2. All right, dumping them in. Y minus 6 equals negative 3/2 times x minus 0. When we distribute, negative 3/2 x plus nothing, right? And adding the 6 to the other side gets us that. Questions? Okay. A couple things as I'm working here on getting the assignment up. Notice on the calendar, tomorrow we have a formative quiz. You will need a charged Chromebook. On Friday, our section requires that you have a graphing calculator. Okay? So we need graphing calculators for Friday. I only have a few to loan out during class. So if you have one, make sure you bring it in. All right, your assignment is listed there.